yourself. So, but I'm confident everything will go well. And we have an incredible panel for this workshop today. Ira Spiegel, Josh Berger, and Marlena Grzaslewicz. So we're going to be talking about the art of sound in post-production for filmmaking. And Marlena, I'm going to start with you. If you can tell me, basically, what does a dialogue editor do for filmmaking?
Well, there is a saying I was told actually when I started working as a dialogue editor, that when something is done very, very well, nobody knows that something was done. If there is mistake made, everybody hears this and everybody has a comment about it. So I think this would sort of summarize what it really is. It's difficult to describe for a lay person, but I'm assuming that many of you guys who are in front of the streaming today have idea of sound. Some of you maybe are film students or film buffs. The general idea is that anything what is recorded on location, so actors are performing or the interviewee is being given the interview, there is a microphone, there is camera, all of it is married together today in the digital world. So the sound essentially of me speaking as right now, it's recorded. So what would you do to it? It's already done and recorded. Of course, the editing comes to it. So if I start repeating myself, which I have a tendency and I'm sorry for it, then it has to be taken out. Then my inflection may be in a different place that doesn't sound like the end of the sentence. So to make the story short, the dialogue editor does clean the mistakes or imperfections so the audience is not taken out of the story. Very often thought it's finished if you read it, but the way how it was delivered has the little inflection going up as there is another thought going to come, but the director doesn't want this another thought. So I would look for the alternate ending of the word, this is the end, instead of saying this is the end, right? Or immediately it gives a different sense of what it's supposed to be said. In the narrative films, when they're actors, not just historians or interviewee of any subject, it's a very different approach to it because we do not change the performance. I cannot change the end of the word. Actor performs, director approves that. So it's more looking for the technical glitches. There is a noise in the middle of actor's performance. Somebody dropped something or the plane went by. So this is where I would look for alternate takes, different takes, and try to replace it, hoping that I don't change the performance. Or then it's something what is called ADR, which is a part of essentially dialogue, where we bring the actor to the studio and actor has to repeat the sentence, which is on camera for the very technical reasons. So, you know, I always love that I make a living taking the clicks from people's mouth, taking out the clicks from people's mouth, because part of it is also, some people have a lot of saliva and it's sort of clicky and it's very wet, as we say. It doesn't sound pleasing. So part of my job is also to make the person on camera or to sound transparent, clean, pleasing. And of course, without a person like Josh, who is a re-recording mixer, my work is only, I don't know, 30% done. Really, he brings the additional elements to what is called dialogue, general in film, right? I don't know if I answered the question enough. We cannot hear you.
Thank you, Marlena. That is a great answer. And I wanted to say to our panelists that when you want to discuss something further with each other, you know, please feel free. And to the folks who are watching out there, the live stream, I know Dee set something up so that you can ask us questions. So we're willing to take those, you know, throughout this conversation. And I also wanted to thank all of the people who are going to be watching us today. I know this is a Saturday at 11. But everything that's going on in the world, you know, taking your time out, we really appreciate it. So I'm going to move from Marlena, and thank you, Marlena. That was a great answer. Back to Ira. Ira, tell us, I mean, you've worked with, the three of you who have worked with some incredible names out there. And I'd love to tell you, love you to tell us, you know, a few of the folks that you have worked with. Don't be humble, and also tell us what an effects editor does.
I'll start with that, what an effects editor does. But I probably should say that what I do now as an effects editor and what I did at the beginning of my career as an effects editor is different. I began working in about 1980. So from 1980 to 1995, I worked on film, like Marlena. And I would say that to characterize the work of a sound editor then, during that period, is very different from 1995 till now. So 15 years as analog sound editor, and now 25 years. So 25, God, I've been working a long time. For 25 years in the age of digital. The transition happened somewhere between 93, 94, and they're fundamental, well, of course they're the same, but the protocols have changed. So like Marlena, I would say first off, and Dan, this refers to something you said vis-a-vis the conversation with your wife, and that is that it all kind of, if you don't want to draw attention to the work you do, the sound effects on the screen should appear very natural and should appear kind of intuitively part of what you're seeing. So that's a challenge. But there's also this category called sound design. So we are sound editors, and then suddenly sometime in the late 80s, maybe even earlier, there were sound designers, which kind of may be cousins of music composers or music editors. But the work a sound editor does is he looks at backgrounds, he looks at what are called hard effects. Backgrounds are the overall ambience. It looks at the hard effects, the footsteps, the nuts and bolts of movement, action. There's a category called Foley's, which are created after production and began as a kind of category of sounds that you needed if you were going to strip out the actual production dialogue of a film and send it, overseas. But I don't want to get too into that. And then we take from Marlena, the dialogue editor, part of her production. They're called production effects, which are handed over to a sound editor. If someone says something, but then walks 10 or 20 feet, opens a door, passes through it, and closes the door, that's referred to as a production effect. So it's handed over to a sound editor. There's a great deal of kind of compartmentalization in editing. Marlena is a dialogue editor. I have been an effects editor. Josh has worked as a music editor, but also is a mixer. And that's what I wanted to say. The advent of Pro Tools or digital editing in the 90s fundamentally changed the way we editors and mixers work. The line now is very, very blurred between what a sound editor is particularly and what a mixer is. Josh does sound editing and mixing. I can, in my humble way, I can do a little bit of mixing. I can put my sounds into the ballpark of what a project, what the director thinks or wants it to sound like. You could never do anything like that when we were on film. You simply placed sound effects in their location. You could do nothing to it. You might be able to scrape a little mag off and do a quick little fade, but you virtually prepared soundtracks, brought them to a mix, and the mixer did everything. Marlena is now using Isotope. Josh is using Isotope. I'm using Altiverb and Isotope, and I'm bringing sounds to the mix, which are part of the way cooked, processed. So there are big differences from the beginning of my career, to what happens now. But like Marlena, you want your work to be within the context of the frame. It doesn't draw too much attention to itself, because then you take the audience away. And it's a combination of a technical skill and a lot of taste, a great deal of taste, choosing sound effects. And again, Dan, getting back to the conversation with your wife, what is virtually catnip to me is having a totally empty canvas and being given the task of creating a soundscape. And knowing that Marlena, because we often have worked together, knowing that her compartment is going to be, taken care of, and that they will blend together. And then someone like Josh will put the finishing touches, sometimes the basic touches. If Josh sometimes says, well, I don't like that at all. You've chosen a wrong bird or a wrong background. We've got to do something about it. But all of that collaboration, is what makes it still very exciting. It's a wonderful buzz.
So the context of the story that I told my wife is that Jamie, my wife, and I were watching Wild Kingdom, some sort of documentary with animals and sort of far away, and you hear this little skittering of the animals, and my wife is like, that's amazing how you can hear that. And I'm like, honey, that was a sound effects editor who added in those roars and all the other sounds around that. And she looked at me and just was like, why would you tell me that? Why would you ruin this for me? And I was like, that's it. That's how sound effects can really have such an importance. And Ira and Marlena, you both brought up the transition from analog to digital. And, I was at the tail end of, analog moving into digital. And Josh, you probably saw some of this also. And I'm wondering what you all think about that transition. And then Josh, we'll get to you. That transition from analog to digital, how has it affected creativity over time? Has it given you more allowance, or given you more allowance, or has something been lost?
Can I speak, Marlena, for?
Of course, yeah.
It's an extraordinary enrichment, I think. I kind of, because I'm probably the oldest here and I was not really computer literate, when I finished, I think, baseball, right, Marlena, we were up there, and then when we came back to New York, the transition had begun.
Yeah.
So I find it an extraordinary enrichment and liberation. It took me a little while to understand that, I could listen to many, many tracks at once, and then not only listen to them, but begin to do mixing on them. And that was really a remarkable renaissance, I think, for sound.
With dialogue, essentially, it allows me to be much more precise and get so deep to this little, right, which I can actually take out when with the analog, I would put a little tape on the back of magnetic. So when the actual magnetic tape went through the head, which read the sound, it would just pop out and this little would be taken, because I could not cut this out. In 16 millimeters, you had only a half of a frame in, and in 35, 1/4 of a frame. This is how much I could manipulate that. With digital system, I go to the sample. So I really can take so much out of it. And this is the beginning of Pro Tools, right? And so this is sort of, the technology allowed me to be much more precise. And then the additional things, Pro Tools started having some audio suites, meaning giving some other tools. I could slow down the word or speed up or change the pitch, which before in analog only Josh could do that, the re-recording mixer could do that. Now we have yet many, many more softwares, and Ira mentioned Isotope. It's one of the plugins for Pro Tools, which allows to do many things, to take the backgrounds, to it's essentially like painting, because you can look at the waveform and everything what it's there, and there will be like a little line which is orange, and I know there's a siren, and actually I can clean the siren before I give it to Josh. Sometimes, and this is sort of, I think this is where the experience is very important, more than ability to use the tool itself. because sometimes I would take the siren out, but if it was while the woman was speaking and had a also higher pitch, I'm actually affecting this little bit of her voice because I cannot completely take this out. So I am very respectful that my abilities are in some ways limited, and I would always refer to the recording mixer who has more tools, but also more experience. He listens to what I did different way than I listen when I cut. And it's difficult to understand when you are actually not sitting with it or in it, but it really is. All of our jobs have a different focuses. At the end, we want to deliver the beautiful soundtrack, which then the audience enjoys. But we all contribute different things, and I don't like to overstep on each other. Ira said that his job as a sound effects editor and mixers, it's much more blurred than mine and Josh's. Because there's certain things, I don't add the reverb to the voices because I'm working with headphones. You want to hear it in a room, not even if it's not a theater, but in regular household television place, people don't listen on headphones, right? So it's a different perspective, it's a different relation to it. So I very much still defer totally and surrender to the recording mixers.
But Josh, oh, I was just going to ask Josh, is your expectation as a mixer that dialogue tracks and sound effects tracks are going to be a certain percentage pre-mixed for you?
I think what's really great and unique and you know, learning from you guys and working with you guys is that everybody takes ownership of their own material. And so the dialogue editor, the sound effects editor, it's their job to present their own influence over the material as well. And whether that means leveling, pre-mixed, using plugins or isotope, it's their mark on the material. And I think that that's a really important thing to help the progression of the soundtrack in general. So if we were to start from raw tracks or raw sound effects, we would never get to the point of presenting a final soundtrack to the end viewer. So each person along the way, whether it is panning or even choosing the right sound effects, in my opinion, that's a bit of pre-mixing. You know, you bring all of your experience with the cutting and the choosing of the sound effects. So for me, it's a great roadmap, and it's a great way of kind of understanding the landscape of the film without even seeing a frame of it, but seeing how tracks are organized, seeing how much stuff are processed or panned, or the types of sounds that you choose really determine the outcome of the film. So, you know, just a little background of kind of how the re-recording mixer position works is, you know, you're tasked with taking these elements and sitting with the directors or the producers or the film editors in a, whether it's a large theater or sometimes a smaller mixing stage, and taking all of these elements and weaving them together to create the final soundtrack. And it's really the first time that each of these pillars, dialogue, music, and sound effects, all come together for the first time. And we hear it, you know, with the edited picture. Sometimes it's with the color graded picture. So things start to feel a certain way. And, you know, whatever tools we end up using, it's really about the narrative of the film and how the director feels the interaction should be between the music and the dialogue in a certain scene, or maybe the sound effects and the music in another scene. So it's really kind of painting that last little narrative strain, you know, helping the narrative of the film be put forth, and for the viewer to sit down and understand or believe that it takes place in the 1880s or takes place on Mars. So there's really a wide range of what we could do. But it's from the moment that you sit down and watch the first frame that you're in the film, and kind of like Marlena is saying, it takes out, you know, the dialogue editor takes out the movie making process. You don't hear the dollies, you don't you don't see the boom shadows and things like that they take out on the picture side. So it's kind of taking all of these elements and crafting them so that when you sit down as a final viewer of the product, whether it's a documentary, narrative TV script, or a feature film, you understand what you should be watching.
When we were chatting earlier, we talked about that, you know, folks out there don't really know the finishing process. They think that when a film is done shooting and editing, that it's essentially done. And the three of you, this is where you come in to really fill in everything else. And this is the finishing process. Josh, I was wondering if you could describe a little bit of that, of like, you know, where the film is actually done in production and then moving over into this. And Ira and Marlena, of course, expand on that process moving into the finishing.
Sure. So basically, you shoot the film and you don't always shoot it in order. I mean, I think we're talking to people who kind of understand the basic principles of filmmaking, but, you shoot different scenes. Sometimes you go back and reshoot other scenes, and all of that material from set, including what was recorded, the dialogue, usually from the boom and from the lav, all of that is kind of translated throughout the picture editing, and they decide what takes to use, how to craft the story. And then once that process is done, the film editing process kind of gets handed over to Marlena and Ira, and each of them, and a music editor generally too, or a composer. And they generally take it from there, and they do their jobs to, like, as they're saying, either clean up the dialogue, choose the sound effects, work with the picture editor, work with the director to decide kind of the feeling of the overall film that they want to do, or that they want to create. And then once that's done, we bring it to the final mix. And what the final mix does is we take all of these elements, we lay them out usually on a either film mixing console, control surface, whatever it may be. And we take those and we blend them together. Sometimes the dialogue alone sounds one way, but once you add the backgrounds and the Foley, it sounds right, it sounds correct. So what we're always trying to do is make the film feel like we are there, whether it's, we take the filmmaking process out of it, like I was saying. So yeah, so as the re-recording mixer, once we get all the elements together, and once we've decided that the music should be at this level, it should be played out of these speakers, all of the ADR, the performances are correct so that you kind of don't notice them, then we're kind of finished with the film. It's almost the very last stage of the process before it kind of is played in theaters or on television.
It's funny because I hear a lot the term marriage for some reason, marrying the sound to the picture. So you're essentially the efficient marrying.
Yes,
so
exactly.
It's the music, the dialogue, and the effects, and mixing all of those together so that one doesn't overpower the other, and then marrying it to the picture. It's such a neat process that when in the end, it seems like people see one thing essentially, but it is really made up of so many layers and so many levels. And, Ira, how many tracks have you gotten up to in Pro Tools?
Well, hundreds, but you do it in sort of compartments. Like when mixers mix generally, they've got to break it up into bite-sized pieces. They'll generally, a mix proceeds from, right, Marlena, dialogue pre-mix is often the first thing attacked. And then once the dialogue pre-mix is completed, it's kind of switched to a playback machine, and you can put effects and music up, or maybe work on an effects pre-mix if it's a monstrous action film. But even on Vietnam, Ken Burns's epic documentary, we had hundreds of tracks and Foley's. The detail was extraordinary.
I think it's interesting that you bring that up. I think the one thing that we've kind of missed to touch upon is that, the one thing, because there's so many tracks and there's so many elements, and sometimes you would get lost in the weeds of just overwhelmed of all of the material that's in front of you.
Sure.
The thing that we really try and use as our benchmark is the dialogue, right? So we try, the very first thing we do is make sure that the dialogue sits at a very particular level. It feels correct. It feels blended with itself, because obviously, it could be from different camera angles, the scene to scene, shot to shot. So we have to give ourselves some sort of a benchmark in which to put everything else around. So like Ira is saying, it's very crucial that we get that part correct, because once that's correct, it's easier to fill in the pieces around it, whether it's music or sound effects. So
well, I don't want to date myself, but when I worked on Ishtar, it was my first dialogue editing film, and Michael Kirschberger said that the dialogue premix has to stand on its own. It's like the spinal column, the backbone of the film. And so there can't be any holes. I don't want to hear you say, well, you know, the effects will be there or music will cover this. A dialogue premix is an integral and standalone instrument. And so, yes, this is still the case. But I wanted to say, listening to you, Josh, I've mixed with, and Marlena too, so many mixers, you know, in our age, and some of them like boxers, some of them got kung fu artists, some of them wrestlers, martial, mixed martial. The way a mixer attacks the film, you know, some are like softer and what appears to be more passive, and how they approach the material, you know, is a very individual thing, I think.
Well, I think we all bring our personality to work. As much as we do, it's a craft. There is some element of art in it as well. And so the artists have their own personalities. When Josh mentioned that, sort of, he said that, you know, talking about the workflow and sort of what is the last moment is this mix to bring this all together, that we take the filmmaking out and we are telling the story. I just wanted to, because it may sound, maybe sort of we didn't say that as much as we, meaning the craft sound people, have the impact on the story, at the end, it's not really our idea. So before I start cutting dialogue and Ira start putting his backgrounds and hard effects and ideas, we have something what it's called the sparring session, meaning that we sit with the director and the picture editor, who are the most intimately engaged with the story they are telling. Director had an idea, the picture editor helps this idea to come to the fruition. And so we get the guidance from them. It doesn't mean that we are not allowed to have our own creativity in it, but at the end, the vision is the director's vision and with the picture editor. So the sparring session, I use this horrible word sometimes that when you sit and talk, it's almost like a diarrhea of thought, sorry for saying that, meaning that somebody has an idea about the scene, and I would most of the time say something very stupid. And I said, you know nothing about effects, you're a dialogue editor, but nevertheless, whatever idea I had, the idea maybe itself wasn't the correct idea, but he would or another person bounced out of it. And because I opened the other door, I opened sort of the wrong door, but there is next one which is connected and you go this direction. So what I'm saying is a very creative process. And the actors like to hear that because it also gives them the certain perspective to their own project, which they are lived with for so long. So it's a very collaborative work. And, you know, even if you have a huge ego, there is still room for it. Even if you work with the beginners, that your creativity can be embraced. This is what
the spotting session is really the first building block of the collaboration. Yeah.
Marlena, you brought a really interesting point that for me personally, like the reason why I'm in this industry in general is that I love the collaboration. It's a team sport, you know, very much, you know, we are all little pieces of this bigger puzzle, but once it's put together, it becomes this, you know, kind of beautiful tapestry and piece of art that we all had a little hand in. And for me personally, that's why I get up in the morning, is because we do it as a team. And it really is teamwork, and not one of us could do it without the help of others. And the spotting session is one step in that direction, but it's just fantastic, actually.
Can the three of you?
Sorry.
No worries. Can the three of you tell me how that creative collaboration is going during a pandemic?
Well, this is what I actually wanted to say when you asked the question, that Josh and I are actually in the process of mixing the documentary series, which you are involved in as well. I don't know how much this is a secret, but the cat is out of the bag. Anyway, we mix been in very different places. Josh is the only one who is actually in the mixing stage, so he handles all these elements. And speaking of the collaboration, we would meet Josh and I over the Zoom and another software, and he would play the scene and say, what do you think? And I would say, well, you know what, I think this music, it's something doesn't work. I don't even know what I want to say, but the fact that what I feel, but the fact that I point this out directs him saying, let me hear. Oh yeah, you are right, there is something not there. Or no, I think it's okay. This is sort of, so even in this completely, which normally would happen in the mixing studio, I would be sitting next to him and interrupting him all the time, right? Now I cannot interrupt him all the time, so I have to hold my thought, and then I cannot stop talking.
No.
There is still collaboration, but it has to come. This collaboration has to come in the pandemic from understanding that we still need each other. So I have wait for Josh to contact me that he is actually ready for my input. So I am not breathing on his neck 8 hours a day, eagerly waiting. So it's difficult, but if we have respect for each other craft and understand that this respect should be sort of exercised, then even in this crazy way of working today, we still can do that, and we do.
Every day.
Yeah. So for me, the first part of it has remained the same, which is namely I will work from home, building tracks, building sound. But I'm really uncomfortable with the business of doing the mixes remote. I don't know if I can get used to it. And that's what, Josh, why I asked you what system seems to, and Marlena, you had mentioned it, and both of you speak very highly of it. I have yet, I did one mix, Marlena, the vote, we were on Zoom, I think, which was just an unmitigated disaster in terms of the collaboration and signing off on sound. But in fairness, that was really the very first few weeks of the pandemic. That was in March. So things have changed. I'm not comfortable, with the remote part of the mix. I really look forward to being in a mixing studio with the other collaborators and all of us, sharing precisely the same experience. I don't think it's the same.
Josh, does it make you feel lonely?
Yes, very lonely.
Yeah, I can see that.
I think what's interesting, though, is that you guys have a long-standing collaboration with somebody like Ken Burns, and so you already understand some of the things that he and the team are looking for. So I think we can take it to a certain, it's harder with people who you're trying to interact with for the first time, or, things happen on the mix stage that you couldn't plan for and are great, wonderful mistakes. You trip over a brilliant idea in the sense that, you would never think about these in the confines of your own space. So that's kind of the beauty of being.
Yeah, that's a very, very good point. Exactly. There's a spontaneity that occurs in a mix studio. And, some of the dynamic tensions, the conflicts create wonderful, sounds and results.
I agree.
And off of that, this collaboration, just among yourselves, yes, but you're also collaborating and working for and with the director, the producers, and I'm sure that that's changed. But otherwise, outside of the pandemic, tell us a little bit about that collaboration with producers and directors, and how that communication works, and to understand what they want.
I'll go. Well, Josh pointed out, with years, with familiarity with a person comes a kind of trust and understanding. It's almost intuitive. When I've worked with directors, editors that I've worked with time and again in the past, a certain portion of my work it just comes naturally. There's no need really to go over it in detail. I think there's a sense of that my taste is understood or appreciated by them, and I understand what they want. With new directors, it becomes a lot more just a lot more attention. I find I have to talk to a person and get to understand them. Like I'll be starting a film this week, so I've had conversations with the director to understand, his taste, his expectations. We will do a spotting session, and there'll be more back and forth and give and take. And then ideally, what you would like to do ideally, if the schedule permits, is at least with sound effects, you preview work before a mix. with a director and an editor. That doesn't happen often enough, I find. And that part of that is just the kind of the economics of working. The average amount of time you spend on a film oftentimes does not include the luxury of previewing your work and going through, like, you know, a shakedown cruise, so to speak, where you spend a day or so just reviewing your options. I can't really think of the last time I did that.
I agree. It's kind of infrequent to do that, but the sooner that the two teams, when I'm the editorial, the picture editorial and the sound editorial can come together, the result is always better, I think.
Yeah.
You have an understanding of the tracks. You could give them stuff, ideas start to form. It's always better to be on the same page earlier as opposed to getting to the mix, and especially with people that you haven't collaborated with in the past. And it's kind of like, oh, this isn't what I was thinking, you know.
I just have one final thing, because you were asking earlier.
Yes.
Oh, wow.
I just have to make a break.
Yeah, Kim, it's been
We
called.
have a new president. It has been called.
Announced that. Yeah, Biden is winner. Anyway.
So
terrific.
Let's continue. Sorry, I just had breaking news.
Of course.
I just wanted to say that the kind of dynamics of a mix, and Josh, that's something that's always fascinated me about the mix, is, you know, there can be extraordinary tension in a mix room that has to be acted out. The final product, you've got to get the job done. You've got to hopefully get it done on time, and the powers that be have to be satisfied. But I can't tell you the number of times that getting to that place, just in terms of, you know, the dynamics of personalities, there are memorable moments, you know, positive ones and negative ones to get there. And that in and of itself is a conversation. Marlena, I think, oh, go ahead.
What I find, sort of to continue what we are guys saying, is that I found this one of the most difficult parts of this freelance world, which I'm living in for the last 30 plus years, is that I have to present myself as a craft person, as an artist, and at the same time a business person. So it comes then to the relationship with the producer, is how do you navigate of saying, I need more time, not because I want you to pay me for 3 more extra weeks. Actually, I need these weeks to deliver what you expect me to deliver. And it's so difficult to navigate that, be a salesman, essentially, for yourself, and at the same time protect and convince the director and producer that I really care about your film. Of course, it's my job, it's my profession, I'm doing this to make a living, but it's not only that. Then I would be a lawyer or somebody else. I really love the craft, right? And this is, doing this for 30 plus years, I never learned how to do it comfortably. So
what, business part of it is uncomfortable?
How to sort of negotiate, right? That the film requires more, because when I say I need more to cut dialogue, it means that I want more work, it means I want more money, which is not really what is driving that, right? So establishing the collaboration with people and then stay when the directors are loyal, it sort of takes this all away, because then you develop the mutual trust that they know that if you're asking for it, means you really need it. You're not driven by profit. But it depends, it's like any relationship, right? It doesn't matter with whom and why and what it's driving it. But nevertheless, this is something for those of you guys who are listening to us and will enter this world. I don't know, maybe think about that ahead so you'll know how to make
the triangle, the 3 corners of the triangle, and pick 2. Is that appropriate? Is that apt? Yeah.
Can you tell us about the triangle? It's in the film world. Yeah, we hear it a lot.
Let me draw it. You're asked, you can only pick 2. And the 3, let me pull it out here. I'll put it up. Can you see it? Fast, cheap, and good. Pick two. I generally go for good. Is that the correct? Fast, cheap, and good? Those are the three.
Yeah.
So you can only pick two. So fast and cheap is not going to be good. Good and fast is not going to be cheap. Cheap and good is not going to be fast.
Right.
It does seem to work.
I was wondering if the three of you could give us your origin stories. Like how did you get in? How did you start? Marlena, you were saying, could have been a lawyer. But what brought you in? What made you want to work in film? And tell me about any mentorships. Would be great.
Should I start? This is what you said? Okay.
Yes, please.
Everybody can hear I have an accent, so I wasn't born here. I came at the age of 33. I already had not 33, 28, sorry, damn. I already had a career in Poland. I was a picture editor working for the Polish television, and this is really what I went for school, to film school for. I have a degree in picture editing, whatever it means, really. It's my phone is beeping because everybody's saying, Biden, so I'm very sorry for it. Anyway, I came here, I didn't speak any English, just a typical immigrant story. I knew that I wanted to stay in film. I didn't know how to start that. And then I met Ira in the local small shop when I was selling coffee and bagels. And I heard him talking to other people about film. And I said, this must be some kind of place there when people make movies. So finally I get some courage, and sheepishly, with completely broken English, much worse than now, I said that, oh, by the way, I actually would like to work in film. And the rest is the history, meaning that essentially Ira built my career in a sense, or helped me to build my career. And speaking of the mentorship, he definitely was my mentor. Without his help and trust, I wouldn't be where I am today. So I never wanted to be a sound editor. It wasn't my dream at all. I had very little knowledge about sound, but I just sort of fall into it. I loved film. I love communication. I love people. I love collaboration. So did I compromise a little bit of a dream that I wanted to cut picture? Yes, but also life happened. At the time when I established myself enough that people knew my work ethics, I was going through some part of my life which didn't allow me to drop the income to pursue my dream. So I stayed with what I learned, and I love it. I adore it. It's a craft. It's a skill which I have, and I can pontificate about it. Thank you, Dan.
Thank you, Marlena. That's great.
I can dovetail off that because I'd like to credit Marlena as a huge influence on my career. I as a kid grew up in the suburbs, and I had an interest in music and wanted to go maybe record music or play music in some way. And I ended up at Ithaca College. And Marlena happened to be teaching there for one semester. It's like at the very end of my college career, and she was a professor there, and it instantly clicked. I had no idea about filmmaking or the film sound or anything like that. And just so happened, our paths crossed, and now I could have been anything. And now I attest just about everything that I know and how I acted in the film world and sound world to Marlena. So by osmosis, Ira, thank you as well.
I just want to say one thing, Ira, before you talk about your career. The biggest pride rather I have, or if I can say, because I am 61, I'm sort of winding down my career. All the not sleeping nights and crazy hours and everything, really, the fact that I can now professionally work with Josh, who was my student, or there are other also, I think this is really sort of, that's why I became sound editor, I guess. I will get very emotional. Speaking of the mentorship, I had a mentor in Ira, and it's if you get, you should give. And I think this is sort of what I'm saying very emotionally.
Mm.
So sweet. Ira?
Well, the mentorship, we began early on, I think, talking about, what may be lacking now, not only at the origins of the digital age, but also now with the pandemic, where we can't be in the same room as other people. Yeah, mentorships they're crucial and critical. They're the most fundamental thing. So all three of us, Dan, went to film school. But when I began working, there was an older generation of people who were a bit snide, insecure, a little irreverent about people who went to film school. So I reached a point early on. I didn't mention, that I went to film school. I went to film school in England from 75 to 78, and then I continued living in England for another 10 years or so. Well, I was there in all 10 years. So my training on film was a little different than the way Americans work. There were different equipment, different protocols. And I didn't really have one mentor, but I surrounded myself as much as I could. I was working on feature films and documentaries. It's interesting, my first job, I'm uncredited. I worked on the French English production about Vietnam, based on the book by, his name escapes me. But, so it was really very kind of touching, ironic, to work on another iteration of Vietnam many years later, and how, the narrative has changed and the technology has changed. I've worked on, I think my original, the first really, I worked on more feature films in the beginning of my career than now. I began moving toward documentaries. I'm not sure why. I was always interested in film, and after going to graduate school in fine arts and sculpture, I think I decided that this love of film is something, that I could actually turn into a career and make a living. That's what I did in the late 70s, and then came back to the States, moved to New York, worked in California a number of times. And here we are.
And now, Marlena and Ira, you're in addition to full-time jobs of sound editing, you're also teaching.
Yes.
Yes, Marlena's been doing a lot longer than me. I teach at St. John's University in Queens. I teach 2 classes, one sound editing design, and then I work with the senior students on their senior projects to carry it through from the edit lock through the mix. I take them to a mix, hold their hand. A lot of it's social work as well as kind of sound editing. It's a very difficult job for students to finish film, but it's a lot of fun.
Teaching is a mentorship, or I should think that it should be, to have a privilege of standing in front of 15 students or 15 young people and have a voice and be listened to. It's a privilege. And who am I that they are listening to me, right? So
Yeah.
I adore that. And also the craft which I have, it's so minimal and so really not important in a very big scheme of things. As I said, my phone is flashing because everybody's excited about the results. So what is really sound editing, right? But at the same time, I spend my living doing that. I make a living raising my son and supporting myself, and not be able to pass this on to the new generation. It's, as I said, privilege, but also it's a lot of satisfaction in it, right? I'm doing this for 12 years. I supposed to do it for 2. I never knew that I would stay so long, but I literally love doing that. So here I am.
Yeah.
Now, Josh, wasn't one of the first classes you had, or first Marlena? You had a class with Marlena, like one of the first. Is that right?
It was her first intro. Like she did like a 1 Saturday course, and I was like, oh, that looks cool. And that was it. And the first time that she was teaching that, the first time that I had learned anything about there, and now here we are, 12 years later.
What class was it? What was the title of it?
I think it was like Intro to Post-Production Sound or something like that. Or it was like a one credit. It was like, this is what ADR is. This is what Foley is. And it's like, oh, I didn't realize that there was the ability to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so Josh, I'm sure within the class, you learn a little bit of the business of filmmaking. You learn a bit of, a lot of the creative side of filmmaking. But what do your mentors tell you about, within the creative world, the thick-skinned, how to be thick-skinned in a creative world? What can you say about that?
Well, it's tough. I think a large portion of the mix and this whole thing is less about the technology and more about how you treat people and how you interact with them. So I tell, we've done Zooms with Marlena's students as well. And one of the main things I tell them is to just be a good person. You have to be in the room in a dark, sometimes very dark room with these people for 10, 14 hours a day. Like as a director or as a sound person or whatever it is, you want to surround yourself with people, A, who you can trust, B, who you work well with in a creative setting, but also like people that you like and are good to you and understand and have the same kind of ideals and goals and stuff like that. So I think it's really important to be wary of other people and other people's feelings and certain things like that. So it's just a part of who you are as maybe as a mixer is running the room to a certain extent and making sure that you understand where people are coming from, because people have lives and people have different ideas and stuff. So I think it's really important. Yeah.
That's fantastic. Folks, we have just a few minutes, and I was wondering if you could give us a few parting words, Ira, Marlena, and Josh. And first of all, I want to say thank you to all of the folks who have been participating and will be watching this again later, the recorded version, because I'm sure that there's a lot of people who are just running outside right now, and you'll be able to watch this again later. So Marlena.
Well, I think, as I said, that I could be a lawyer. I'm making a very big statement, meaning that whatever you guys decide to do, either in film or in other profession, because you just love movies as a format of entertainment or getting knowledge, if you think about life generally, just do something and pick something what you are passionate about. Life without passion is not worth living. And I really mean it, even including the now phone ringing and people honking outside. If we didn't care about what is surrounding us and what we do, then why do we wake up in the morning? So really just don't lose this. Don't ever lose passion. And I don't know how old people are who I'm talking to. So if I sound idiotic, I'm very sorry. I'm not patronizing. I think more that people who are in front of us are film students or students generally who are thinking what my life will be tomorrow. It's pandemic. I cannot see the light in the tunnel. The light is there, and it's a lot of this light to be seen. It's up to us.
Yeah. Well, I agree with what Josh said, and Marlena, both of you. You're talking about the nature of relationships as the bedrock, is the most important thing. My mother never really understood what I did. Sometimes when she was visiting me, I've told you this, Marlena, I said, oh, I've got a job. I'm going to start next week. They sent me, like a DVD. I'm going to watch it. And would you like to watch it with me? I think I showed her War. And so we watched it. It meant a lot to her because she was a young person. But at the end of it, she turned to me and she said, I don't understand. It sounds fine to me. What do you have to do? What is there to do? But I would explain to her what I did. I think, like probably in many professions, you really what keeps you going, the highs and maybe particularly the lows, is your devotion, your love for what you do. When I think of my career, yeah, I've really loved it. And when I said, the greatest, it's like catnip for me still. To get an empty canvas and to be given the task, the job of like filling it in. Part of it is technical, part of it is artistic, and I still love it. And that's what resonates with me still. It's never, ever been a task or something, you know, a chore, that a drudgery.
And I'll just add to that. I you know, love what I do, and other people should strive for that as well. I love getting up in the morning. I love collaborating with people, and I love watching the final product. I'm at heart, I'm a movie buff, and I love watching movies, and I love seeing what other people are doing out there, and, you know, enjoy it.
Yes.
Josh Berger, Marlena Grzaslewicz, Ira Spiegel. Thank you so much for taking the time today. And thank you to everyone who was watching today. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. I know you will now.
Very much.
All right. Goodbye. Thank you. See you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.